Good morning. I'm going to show you how to model a portal frame steel structure. We'll start with setting the levels. We've got a couple of levels given to us out of the box, level 0 and level 1. I'm going to put a couple of subsurface levels under the ground for the foundations. The first one is going to be a shallow level foundation for a raft. We probably won't use this, but I'm putting it in anyway, knowing that with every possibility we'll ignore this particular level. This one here, however, it's gone in as level 3. We'll change its name to footings and pile caps. Click on the white space and rename the corresponding views over here. This is one that we will certainly use. It will have various footings and pile caps and ends of columns in here. And there's the foundation that we're going to be using for this portal frame. We've got this one in here. I'll rename it Raft Foundation, but there's every prospect that this would just simply get ultimately deleted and certainly ignored. Rename the corresponding view over here, so it says Raft Foundation, that's fine at that. Level, we'll rename it Ground Level. Click on the white space, rename the view as usual, tidy that up a wee bit, make them all in line. Oops. So footings and pile caps, the one that we will use. Raft Foundation, the one we possibly won't. We might put in a raft to let you see it. Ground level at 0, that's fine. Level 1 is good. 4 meters is just about right. I'm going to go up one level above that and keep it at 4 meters. 4 meters is about right for a commercial building. And then it's not going to be level 4 clearly, so that gets renamed as well to the level 2. So yes, that, and then one final level. So I'm just going to call it portal frame or top of portal frame. Either one of those will do. I'm just going to call it portal frame, but top of portal frame is probably more accurate. It really doesn't matter much. Click on the white space, rename it, and here you've got your project browser all properly named with the various levels you're going to put in the building, starting from the foundations going all the way up to the top of the portal frame. The lowest level, footings and pile caps, we're going to put in the grid lines. Now we're going to put in 5 grid lines, and I'm going to make them 10 meters apart. So the grid line tool here, make sure this is bold and it's the active view. The grid line tool in here, you just simply click on here, one, and then you can either make sure this is offset at 10 meters. We're going to make them 10 meters apart, or just do it manually. I'm going to zoom out a wee bit to make it easier, to make it not pick up the hundreds. 10 meters, and I'm just going to put in 5 of these. Now clearly not every building has got grid lines 10 meters apart. Sometimes it's not as big as that. That's quite a substantial building we're going to model. But they have to be something, and I've chosen 10 meters. I'm going to put in half a dozen or maybe more horizontal grid lines in, and the first one there will remember that this finished at 5, and this will rename itself 6. I've got to change that. So I click on it, modify, click on it, change it to a capital A for me please. Just click on the white space, and that's fine. The rest of them all remember A, they'll go B, C, D, etc. So I'm going to put these at, I'll just make it 10 meters again. Again, this number here is variable. Zoom out a wee bit, just makes it easier sometimes. And I'm going to put in, I'm not sure what size will make this building. I'm going to put in a good few. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll do 8. Again, not every building is 8 grid lines at 10 meters apart, but every building will be set up in some kind of similar way. So Good thing to know how to do the setup. It's the intersections we need between these grid lines, so I'm going to drag these grid lines down to create those intersections. I have to do it with some care, a bit fiddly. Drag it down, there's the intersections made, and that's the setup just about finished. Not quite finished because we've got to change the view range of this lowest level here. So with nothing selected, make sure just by hitting the escape key a couple of times, scroll down to view range, edit, and change this view depth to unlimited so you can see all the way down. And also the cut plane set a wee bit high at 1200. If you change that to 200 and apply that and OK that. These 4 circles here are the elevation markers. This is north, east, south and west. You'll notice if you can select them, you can select them by the fat bit here or by the nose. By the fat bit you can move them around. By the nose, if you single click on it, you'll get 2 lines. Now this is the opening view and this is the closing view. So if we were to look at this as north, obviously, well maybe not obviously, but it's north. And if we were to double click on this, it would take us the view of what will be this structure from the north elevation. So I want to make sure that when I do click on it and look at this structure from its north elevation, I can see the beginning of it using this line here, and I can also see the end of it. Because if this is a glass wall, I want to see it all the way through the building. I don't want the view to stop here. So I drag this one down, and here I'm going to move this here by clicking on the fat bit. This is south, obviously. Click on its nose to set the view range here, the clipping view, and up here like that. East here, move it into the kind of middle somewhere, just a wee bit random. Do the same with west. And then click on the nose, these will move down, and then do the same with west. That's it. So I'm now going to put the structural columns in. I've got the set finished. Again, east, I've got the various levels set here, that's down there. I can ignore this for now. This is the deep level foundation, the footings and pile caps. The shallow level foundation, the raft foundation, which might well be ultimately even deleted, but certainly ignored. The ground level at 0, and levels 1 and 2, and the portal frame, the top of the portal frame. And that's what we're going to model here today. So I'm going to come into footings and pile caps, and I'm going to put the structural columns in. Now structure, column, I've got a single structural column here given to me as I open the blank template, and I could either go with that or I can maybe load in a bigger one. I'm going to have a look at loading in a bigger structural column. Load the family, and you go to the library, UK structural columns, and here the steel, the UC columns I want to use here, and I've got some bigger columns, not much bigger. I'm just going to go with this one here and go back to structure, and 356 by 406, I'm going to use that column. That's going to be fine for me. So instead of clicking all individually all the way along these intersections, I'm simply going to make sure that this says vertical, so they're going vertically, and I want the grid intersections tool to be used here. So click on that, and then I simply identify all the intersections and finish. Now escape to get out of this tool. And if I look in, I should see that I've got these columns all intersect, all the grid intersections. Now I'm going to open up the 3D view, select one of them and SA, and the footings and pile caps is where the base level should be. That's fine. The top level, I want these to go up to level 1, And the base offset, there's no base offset, so that should go to 0. Why it's at 2.5 or minus 2.5 meters, I don't know. Apply that, and that's the columns in for me. Footings and pile caps, level. I'm going to put the footings in. Now around the perimeter columns around here, I'm going to put in a standard rectangular footing. So structure, load in structural foundation, and it's an ordinary rectangular footing. Footing rectangular is fine. Okay, I've got that loaded in. I'm going to add in a new one as well. I'm going to add in the pile cap for 2 piles, and it's this one here, pile cap, 2 piles. It doesn't have to be 2, it could be more, it could be less. And there's pile cap, 3 piles. I'm just going to go with 2 piles and load that in as well. And I'll do the perimeter columns first. And just before I load these columns, the columns down grid line 5 and down grid line 1 have to be flipped. Their orientation has to be changed. So I'm going to over select. I just simply mouse over, select them all, and clearly I've got all kinds of things going on here, grid lines, and so I filter them out. I don't want the grid lines, only those columns do I want selected. So I'll zoom in a wee bit so you can see what happens. I've got them selected, nothing else, and I hit the spacebar one time and they'll flip for me. So I've changed their orientation. I want to do the same with the columns which go down grid line 1. Again, I'm going to over select, I'm just going to over select a wee bit more. I'm going to try and bring in this elevation marker in here, this view. And then again, I'll filter it out. There's the view that I don't want, so I'll take that away. I don't want the grids, elevation, only the columns. Apply and OK that. And if I zoom in and I hit the space bar, you'll see that these are now blue, they're highlighted, selected in fact. Hit the space bar and they'll change the orientation from the vertical original to the new horizontal orientation that I want them to have. So I'm going to put in all the footings all the way around the perimeter of the building, just an ordinary rectangular footing, but these internal columns in here, the ones that live in here, within the building, I'm going to give them a heavier duty footing, the pile cap, because that's where the bulk of the weight of this structure is going to be. So structure, isolated, I've used the lighter one first. I'll just go with the smaller one, 18 by 12, that's not that small. 18 by 12 is a fair chunk of concrete. And I want them to be at columns, and I'm going to carefully select these and finish. I've got to do this 4 times. This lot here, down the left hand side. Finish at columns, the 3 in the middle here. Finish, and at columns, the 3 in the middle and the bottom here. And finish. Now you'll see when we orientated columns, changed the orientation, the footings are kind of behaving themselves. They've changed the orientation as well, according to the orientation of the column that they're supporting. So that's quite a nice behaviour for that rectangular footing. I'm going to put in the pile caps, or the 2 piles, and these middle columns. So again, structure, isolated, and this time I'll change this to the 2 pile caps. That's it there. Make sure you get your small preview up there, and at columns, and just select the columns in the middle of the structure and finish. And in 3D, so we can escape that, and in 3D you can just have a double check that that's all done what you would have expected. That's it. There's our footings in, the internal columns have got this heavier duty footing, the pile cap, and round the perimeter of the building here we've just got the simple rectangular footing. So I'm going to put in a framing elevation. In the View tab, underneath where it says elevations, you should have this thing called a framing elevation. Now, I want you to select that tool, and then zoom into the bottom one here. This is grid line H, and you'll notice that the marker for the frame elevation isn't certain what side it should go on, and it should go on the outside. It should be looking into the building. It doesn't really matter where on the grid line you place it. So I'm going to place it roughly in the middle. Escape, and then I'm going to go in here. I've got a new item in the project browser down here. If I open this up, that's the framing elevation I've got here. Now, selecting it by its edge, I'm just going to make it show all of that view. I've got 5 of them in there. And it does a slightly odd thing. Revit, it defaults to the coarse level of detail down here. And I'd like you to change that so we can actually see that these are in fact columns that we've got in here. Now the two end ones, this one and this one, that's the columns on grid lines 1 and 5. I want these to go up, not to level 1, which is what they're at just now, but I want them to go up all the way up to level 2 and apply. You'll see that that'll behave. You can check it in 3D, and you can see that these two columns, grid lines 1 and 5, are actually taller than the rest. Can you see that? And I'm going to go back to this framing elevation and rename it. I forgot to name it, so I'm going to rename it now. It's not just an elevation, it's a framing elevation, so let's give it its proper name, framing elevation. And as a convention, it's usual to say what grid line it's on, and this one is on grid line H. Framing elevation, grid line H, that's its proper name. And it's the project browser's updated, given that I've renamed it. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to make this just some white space down there. I don't need all that. So that's the framing elevation made, and we're quite far advanced even at this stage. We've got all the columns placed, and we've got all the appropriate footings around the perimeter and around the internal part of the structure. These are the pile caps in here. That's them up there. And these are just the ordinary rectangular footings around the perimeter of this structure. And we've noticed that they have changed the orientation as we flipped this row of columns down grid lines 1 and 5. So, what next? Next is we go to the framing elevation, and I'm now going to start to model the portal frame. Now I want to zoom in a wee bit. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type WT, and I want to be looking at these two views, the 3D view and the framing elevation. So these other views, I'm simply going to shut them down. I can open them up again at any stage, but for the moment, I'm going to shut those down. WT that again. And this is the one I'm going to work on. And hopefully the 3D view, you can actually see it appear as though, well, not quite by magic, but it will appear. So I'm going to model the portal frame in here, and I go to Structure, Beam. Now this is 305 by 165, quite a lightweight beam. It's not terribly lightweight, 305mm isn't that small, but I'm going to load in a larger one so I can show you how to do that. So I go to Insert, Load Family, and I'm still in the Structural Foundations folder, which is where I was last time I looked at the library. So Libraries, UK, and I scroll down to the Framing folder, Structural Framing, and it's in steel again, and it's UB, a UB beam, an ordinary UB beam. So that's the kind of beam I want to load in, and I've got a lot more size options available to me here. I want to load in the one which is 406, if I can find it. 406 by 178 by 74, that one there. I'm going to load that one in, overwrite the existing version, and if I go to Structure, Beam, I make sure that this has in fact changed, and it hasn't for me, so I'm going to change it now to the one I've just loaded in, 406 by 178. And I want to, from left to right, in the project, and the framing elevation, I want to model this. Just clicking to the left of this left-hand column, and I'm going to click somewhere to the right of this middle grid line 3, and I want the angle of elevation here to be somewhere between 15 and 20. This will vary, but I'm going to make mine 17. So click there, and you should see in the 3D view it's beginning to appear in here. I've got some changes to make in here. Clearly I've got to trim it down a wee bit, and I want to put in some haunches in here to give it additional support. So I'm going to come down here, zoom in a wee bit to the framing elevation, and I'm going to draw in another version of this beam. Now, it's a kind of rule of thumb that if you select a beam as a haunch, it's the same beam size as the beam which it's supporting. That's not invariably true, but it's usually true. One thing you will have to change is the Z orientation, the Z justification. I want to change that from top to bottom. So I'm just going to, by eye, click in here. Now, it doesn't matter if I've not got this right, I would just change that at this stage. It's obviously a bit long here and here. And I don't want it to have any wee gaps in here. I don't want this haunch to be, I want it to do its job. I want to support the beam above. That's probably a wee bit long. I'm just going to put that there. And that's looking not bad at that. So somewhere like that, you find yourself fiddling with it a wee bit, but that's going to be the haunch. Doesn't look like much like a haunch just now, but it will be in a minute or two. And you can see it's beginning to appear in here. The bit of the haunch that will remain as a haunch is this bit here. I don't know if you can see that. This bit in here. I'll try and mouse over a triangle. Now, in order to do that, we need to trim this second beam in here, this haunch, and in order to do that, I've got to put in some reference plane lines. So the reference plane line is this tool here. I select it, and then I make sure that this tool here says pick lines, and I pick the outside of the column, and then the outside of the beam. Now these reference plane lines will stop at the end of the line to which they refer. Now I want them to extend. I just want to make it a wee bit easier. And I'll do the one that we did a minute ago there, just so we can see it. And I've got one here, and I want one on the top of this beam that I put in at an angle of 17 degrees. So I'm going to put another one in. I'm going to use this line here. Make sure it's the top one I choose. And extend it as well. I'm going to use them to cut. Alright, I'll trim this down a wee bit. So I finished with the reference planes. I'll put one in a minute on the middle grid line 3. I'm going to give it an offset. In other words, I want to stop this before it reaches the middle of this portal frame. But still working on this corner with this haunch, I'm going to trim this down using these reference planes. So I select the object, just have a wee look, and that's fine. So modify, it's the cut geometry tool, or cut, and then it's the object first, and I'm going to trim it with this line here, and I'm going to select it again, and I'm going to trim it with this line here. And we can see in 3D, possibly a wee bit better, I'll escape that, make that window active, and you can see that it's beginning to appear here. Alright, you can see that this is now looking more like a haunch. It's the same size as the beam above, properly modelled, and it's given it additional support. However, I've clearly got a bit of work to do over here. I want just to trim this beam off a wee bit. I'll use this reference line here, this reference plane here. So I go cut, select the object to be trimmed first, and then the reference plane. And that's that, all trimmed nicely. Now, this bit of the column here is clearly too high. I want it to be at the same angle as this portal frame beam here. Ultimately, the roof will go on top of that. I don't want this rather odd thing projecting above it. So I'm going to cut this bit of the column with this reference plane as well. So Again, it's the same procedure. Cut, select the object, and then use the reference plane to cut it. And you'll see, if I look at this in 3D, that it's kind of behaving itself now. I've got this nicely trimmed, all at the same angle. Okay, now I'm going to move this into the middle, and I'm going to put a central haunch in here, over here. I'll put that in 3D so you can see it appear. I'm actually going to use the framing elevation to do the modelling here. So I'll move this over a wee bit as well, and get to here. And this is the 2D view of this 3D object here, this beam. So structure, beam. Again, I'm just making sure that this says Z justification bottom, and it does. So I'm just going to draw this beam in here and tidy that up just a smidge, don't ask me. So this is the bit of that beam there that's going to be the haunch, the central haunch, and I'm going to trim it as well. Now, to trim it, we use the reference planes, and I don't want this reference plane to be on this grid line because I want to make a gap here. So we're going to have a space between the end of this original beam, the haunch beam of, I'm going to make it 25mm. So reference plane here, and this time I put in that value, the 25mm, and pick lines. And I want to be careful to make sure that that reference plane's on the left hand side there. I don't want it on the right hand side. Ultimately there will be one on the right hand side, but that's only because this will get mirrored in a minute or two. So I'm going to trim this all down a wee bit, tidy it up. I've got a reference plane on the underside. I'm just going to put another one in. I'm not going to use it. I was going to use it and extend it. I'm simply going to use a new one. So I'm going to go reference plane, excuse me, reference plane, pick lines, and make sure I get the underside of the beam. That's that line there. That's that one there. Just extend it a wee bit. And that'll do for my cutting purposes. So modify, cut, and I want to cut this one first. I want to cut it with that. And I want to cut it again, and I want to cut it with that. And then finally, the original beam, I want to cut it as well. So cut, object first, and then I want to cut it with that reference plane there. And you can see that this is beginning to shape up the way it should, as the beam of identical gauge and an identical sized supporting haunch there, the central haunch, and that's how it should look. And that's how you make a half of a portal frame. Now, half of a portal frame is all very good, but we need the full portal frame. So I'm just going to maximize this up again, and that will get rid of the 3D view. And I'm going to mirror this beam, its haunches, and the various reference planes that are associated with it, so that will apply on the right hand side. So I select them, and it's probably going to over select, and that's fine. I'm just going to take out what I don't need. So I filter out. Now I do want the reference planes, but I don't want the grids, so I deselect grids. I'm going to, for the moment, deselect the structural columns, and that's all I need. I just need the reference planes and the framing, the beams. Apply that and OK. And then I'm going to mirror on the grid line. So that's the tool there, mirror, and zooming in, because I know I've got two lines in here very close to each other, and it's the grid line. So it's this one here that I want to mirror it against. And you'll notice that included the reference plane, so it's gone over there. And we've got something that's beginning to look more like a portal frame.